Ladies and gentlemen, this is TVP World. I'm your host, Benjamin Lee, and welcome aboard the Eastern Express. Now, in this episode, we head to Central Asia, where 5 countries, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan, are facing a silent but serious crisis: the brain drain. Thousands of their best students and scholars are leaving for the West, and most aren't coming back. Now, you might think, well, people move all the time, what's the big deal? But in Central Asia, this isn't just about ambition. It's about survival, national, economic, and if Russia has anything to say about it, geopolitics. And of course, where there's opportunity, there's Moscow, ready to help solve the problem in a way that, shockingly, seems to involve more power for Russia. So, without further ado, let's take a closer look at this educational exodus and what it could mean for the region's future.
Central Asia is one of the many regions of the world beyond the Oder which is dealing with the unfortunate phenomenon of brain drain since the fall of the USSR. Now, however, the World Bank is warning the countries in this part of the world that to overcome their looming economic and social woes, they may have to find a way to solve the problem. Central Asia has been heavily investing, both financially and diplomatically, in various endeavors with world powers such as the Belt and Road Initiative. But to run or help run some of these projects, it needs its high-skilled workers back. Many of them migrated to Russia in search of better paying jobs. The current social situation in Russia, however, isn't great.
Today, the reason for our return from Russia is that the pressure on migrants is increasing, especially against Uzbeks. First of all, it is expressed in slander and disrespect.
The World Bank recommends that the region's governments develop explicit policies to encourage skilled workers to return home. A whole framework would have to be set up to accommodate them. This policy ties into the fact that should these workers return en masse, then countries like Kyrgyzstan will have to find jobs for them. After all, highly skilled workers won't just work for peanuts.
And now, let's zone in on the East-splaining portion of our show. Since the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991, thousands of people from Central Asian countries left home to seek greener pastures. This newfound freedom of movement let many of them acquire new, valuable skills and develop themselves in ways that were previously impossible. But since 2024, the situation has changed. Here's why.
Over the last few decades, Central Asian migrants have established many businesses abroad or simply found better jobs to send money back home. These are the most common countries for Central Asian citizens to migrate to, with Japan and South Korea being as low as the double digits in a given year at times. Russia, without a doubt, is the most popular destination by far, and therein lies the problem. Ever since Moscow invaded Ukraine in February 2022, the situation for many Central Asian migrants has become unstable. Russian authorities have been pressuring migrant workers with raids and military summons under the threat of deportation. For many Central Asian workers, the choice is simple, and they go home rather than face certain death in eastern Ukraine. A particularly harsh crackdown came in the wake of the 2024 Crocus City Hall attack, which Russia says was carried out by Tajik citizens. In the wake of this situation, a large chunk of the Russian Central Asian migrant community has dispersed in various directions. Some have gone further west to find work in countries like Poland, others have gone further east to South Korea, and others have returned home, perhaps in the hope of creating some force of change.
And now, let's take a look at the issue in greater detail. Since the collapse of the Soviet Union, Central Asia has seen its top minds leave in droves. Unlike in Soviet times, when talent flowed into Moscow and Leningrad, today they're aiming for London, Seoul, Toronto, and this is a major problem for these countries because they desperately need engineers, scientists, and innovators. The numbers are telling. Over 100,000 Central Asian students are currently studying abroad, with only a third saying that they plan to return. To fix this, governments across Central Asia say they want to reverse the brain drain. Great, it's one little hiccup. They spend less on education and research than almost anywhere else on Earth. And enter Russia, Moscow is proposing a shiny new Russian Central Asian Education Foundation to help manage the brain drain. In theory, it would fund scholarships and build new research centers, but in practice, it's like trusting a drunk to manage your bank account. Russia promises that students would only stay temporarily, which sounds adorable until you remember that Russia has the same understanding of temporary as they do for military occupations. And besides, Moscow currently has its own problems, including not enough money, a PR crisis with Central Asian migrants, and a lingering issue of, being wildly xenophobic. Meanwhile, countries like the UK are actually funding real higher education reforms in Central Asia. And how does Moscow interpret this? Well, as part of a sinister Western plot, obviously, because there's nothing that screams geopolitical stability, quite like accusing the World Bank of masterminding a science fair coup. Kazakhstan might have a fighting chance to reverse brain drain because it has deeper pockets, but the rest of the region is stuck between losing its best people and handing them over to Moscow, hoping that they'll be returned like borrowed library books. Spoiler, they won't. And in places like Tajikistan, the damage is already massive. Officials estimate brain drain has cost them more than 80 billion. That's a lot of lost doctors, engineers, and scientists. And presumably, the only math teachers who could correctly calculate that loss. If Central Asia can't stop the outflow, it risks becoming trapped, poorer, more dependent, and more vulnerable to foreign, especially Russian, manipulation. This brain drain isn't just focused around universities, it's about power. And right now, unless serious changes happen fast, the region's brightest hopes might stay forever out of reach. And now, here to shed more light on the issue is Paul Goebel, Distinguished Senior Fellow from Jamestown Foundation. Hello, sir, and welcome to Eastern Express.
Thank you for having me.
So today we are trying to examine the brain drain situation in Central Asia. Before we dive into the deeper side of things, can you help us kind of paint a picture of just how big the issue actually is, and is that going to be significant impact for Central Asia?
Well, the international community has paid a great deal of attention to the fact that there are now 5 to 7 million Central Asian workers in Russia as migrant workers. It's paid much less attention to the fact that there are several 100,000 students and scientists who have moved abroad from the 5 Central Asian countries. The numbers of students who've moved abroad, or who are now studying abroad from the 5 Central Asian countries, is approaching 200,000. That's an enormous percentage of all students at the higher educational level in those countries. The number of scientists who've moved abroad is smaller, but if anything, a higher percentage of all scientists in the region, probably around 20 to 25,000 for the 5 countries. The consequences of that, if these people do not go back, will be the gradual degradation of the prospects these countries have for independent development and modernization.
As I observe, it seems to be like kind of a negative feedback loop where the country is, less prosperous, which led to people leaving the country, the best and brightest, and that as a result kind of contributed to the, lack of development within the country, which led to more kind of people trying to leave. Do you think that there's any way that this cycle could probably stop perpetuating itself?
Well, the most important thing that needs to be done is to develop as many positions for university graduates and especially for scholars and scientists to pursue careers in their own countries. Trying to restrict people from leaving won't work. Not providing them with that kind of option will lead many to flee, but at the same time, it will, as we've seen in the Middle East, breed demands for revolutionary change. I think that we need to pay attention to brain drain from countries that were cut off from the world, as the Central Asians were until 30 years ago, and to help them develop the scholarly and technical jobs that are needed to hold people in their country if these countries are going to have a chance to make it on their own and develop as we hope they will.
Now, Russia traditionally has been one of the preferred destination for Central Asian countries, people from there to go. And I'm curious about where are their preferred destination nowadays.
We don't have precise figures, but there are some good estimates. I would say that for the region as a whole, roughly 70% of the students and perhaps 30% of the scholars and technical specialists are going to Russia. That's a tradition that existed in Soviet times when Moscow pumped expertise out of the non-Russian republics, and it's continued. On the other hand, the students who go to Russia are far more likely to return than the students who go further abroad. And that's certainly true as well of scholars and scientists who will be much more likely to remain in the West or in the Pacific Rim states or in South Asia, India, and Pakistan. The hostility to Central Asians in the Russian Federation is growing. Many workers are leaving, and so too are many of the students and scientific and technical personnel. So you're quite right that Russia is still the most important destination for these groups, but it's likely to be declining in importance. And the possibility that Russia will hold these students rather than have them go back to their home countries is far less than for the students that are going to Western Europe or India or China or Japan, let's say. So we have to think about this not only in terms of the traditions, the traditional patterns, but what will happen as the Central Asian migration in Central Asia reverses itself and goes home. And I think it's critical for other countries, the Europeans and the Pacific Rim states, to recognize that they have an interest in making sure that students from Central Asia in their countries do mostly go home rather than remain abroad if they want these countries to develop.
Now, you mentioned earlier that there's less cultural acceptance when it comes to the Central Asian students going to Russia nowadays, but the government of itself does seem to still put a lot of effort in incentivizing people Central Asians to go there and study, or having all sorts of different joint initiatives. Do you think that perhaps that is some sort of a soft power or trying to gain any sort of control?
I think there are two reasons that Moscow takes that position. On the one hand, it believes that if it can have these students in Moscow for a while, it will then allow, even if they go home, they will serve Moscow's interest, as you say, as a soft power mechanism. At the same time, and I think this is increasingly important in Russian thinking, they believe that if students go to Russia, they don't go to Germany or Japan, and that the push to get students and scholars to go to Russia from Central Asia by the Russian government has a lot to do with the fact that Russia has, of course, lost a lot of these people to the West, especially since Mr. Putin's the beginning of his expanded invasion of Ukraine 3 years ago. And so this is all has to be taken into account.
And prior to the war, there's also a pipeline where the Central Asian students go to study in Moscow or other places in Russia, and then go on to find work in other parts of Europe. Do you think that that's still something that's occurring nowadays, or are there more kind of screening when it comes to where these people are coming from?
Well, I think that there are lots of students who go to Moscow State University or go to one of the important regional universities of the Russian Federation, who on graduation decide they don't want to stay in Russia, they don't see job prospects at home, and so they too are moving abroad. Mm-hmm. I'm sure that will be an increasing phenomenon, but it's very important that we recognize that the outflow itself will continue and grow unless and until the governments in Central Asia are able to provide more and better jobs for these people. And that's something that those who wish Central Asian countries well should be supporting, as many countries are, especially Great Britain in the case of Turkmenistan and Tajikistan.
Do you think that there is enough collective effort to make it work, or are we going to still see this kind of brain drain go to kind of a critical velocity and see some sort of collapse?
Well, if nothing is done, there is a great danger that the countries of Central Asia will degrade in terms of scholarship and scientific development. That would be a huge tragedy, given that this is a region that will certainly number 100 million people before the end of this century, and it would be a disaster given where those countries are, between India in the south, China to the east, and Russia to the north and west. If those countries begin that kind of death spiral, if you will, the geopolitical consequences are very, very serious indeed. And so it's of importance, and critical importance even, for countries in the West and the international community more generally, to see the solution of this problem, find ways to achieve it now, rather than wait until we see a descent into violence and war.
Right. And going back to how Russia's been trying to project its power into Central Asian country, I'm also curious whether or not they are wary about these countries uniting and potentially becoming some sort of threat to the Russian Federation.
Well, the Russia, on the one hand, thinks that this is Russia's backyard. But on the other, it is very fearful that the populations in Central Asia, being overwhelmingly Islamic, could become the source of Islamist challenges to the Russian Federation. One thing I think that's very important to understand is that Mr. Putin and others like him don't see Central Asia as part of a recovered empire, but rather a zone of Russian influence. So on the one hand, Russia is seeking to continue its influence, but it isn't seeking yet, and I don't think it will anytime soon, to recover these countries the way it's trying to recover Moscow's rule over Ukraine.
All right. Thank you so much for helping us unpack all of that. Really appreciate it. And thanks for being with us on Eastern Express.
Thank you.
And now we're moving on to the Eastern News Flash, a series of all the other stories from the East that you don't want to miss. Ukraine has launched an online marketplace for the Ukrainian military to pursue the latest technologies. Military units will be able to buy various equipment and weapons to suit their needs, but out of their own pockets.
The online marketplace launched by Ukraine's Digital Transformation Ministry is called Brave One Market and has been compared to Amazon. Though instead of buying books or air fryers, you can buy what Ukrainian authorities have dubbed innovations. It is meant to facilitate access to crucial technologies to military units by giving them the ability to acquire the equipment at a moment's notice. Soldiers will be able to buy arms with e-points that are awarded to units which can confirm the destruction of Russian equipment through video recordings. Currently, over 1,000 items are listed on the marketplace. These include everything from drones, signals intelligence systems, AI-based tech and ammunition. Similar to ordinary online marketplaces, soldiers will soon be able to leave reviews of the items they have purchased.
British troops that will be part of the Coalition of the Willing will be focused on training Ukrainian soldiers and will be stationed away from the front lines, according to the Daily Telegraph.
Discussions surrounding the form that the Coalition of the Willing will take are becoming more substantial. The British Defence Secretary has now revealed the exact role that British soldiers will play in this project. Reportedly, they will focus on developing the armed forces of Ukraine to help it fully transform into a modern army. This seems to be a step away from what British Prime Minister Keir Starmer had suggested earlier when he said the coalition would include British troops on the ground and planes in the sky. The initiative was created by Ukraine's European partners as a sort of alternative to an immediate NATO membership. It is meant to improve Ukraine's security and ensure a lasting peace in the wake of a possible ceasefire between Kiev and Moscow.
The Wall Street Journal has reported a buildup of Russian military presence along Moscow's border with Finland. Russia is apparently constructing new military facilities and deploying more troops to the area.
While everyone is preoccupied with the negotiations surrounding the war in Ukraine, Russia has been quietly developing its infrastructure along the border with Finland. This is yet another acceleration of Russia's military buildup along NATO's eastern flank, which started in 2014 following the illegal annexation of Crimea. Western intelligence reports warn that the Russian army has been expanding its bases near Finland to create a new headquarters meant to oversee tens of thousands of soldiers. Moscow is also increasing military recruitment, arms manufacturing, and upgrading railways all along its border areas. Some observers are pointing out that this could mean Moscow is eyeing some sort of confrontation with NATO in the coming years. Eastern NATO members have also been bolstering their own defenses on the borders with Russia and Belarus in recent months.
And that's all on this episode of Eastern Express. But for more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.